Hello, Durud and Shalom. Hi, everyone. Oh my God, my favorite people are here in the chat. I love you guys. Thank you for being here. Guys, we are doing something very interesting and very new. I am going to go study a whole bunch of concepts and ideas, because a lot of times I'm studying these things and I feel like, God, I wish I was sharing these with you guys. This is so interesting. Like, I'm reading books, I'm taking academic courses online. I'm like, this would be so interesting if I could share it with you guys. And I decided, you know what? I should just do more shows going through these with you guys. And today's topic is one thing that I wanted to discuss on this channel for a very long time, right? Because a lot of people don't really understand the reason, the the story behind modern Islamic political movements. And there's this book by Hossein Ali Zadeh, which has been a huge eye opener for me, and I mention it many often. It's been like a year or so that I've been mentioning it a lot, and I have decided to make a series. If you guys welcome this new series, I'm going to go through this book, turn it into slides, and then come and review it with you guys. And this is uh, the first part of this book that I want to talk to you, like the first concept in the book that I want to talk to you about, is about how all of this started. And it basically started with maps. Okay. And a lot of you, I don't know if you know the history behind all of this, on how, after World War I, the Sykes Picot Agreement is the reason behind, it's basically the genesis story and the motivation behind all of the modern political Islamic movements. Because if you understand how all of this started, you will be able to make sense of so many other things that are happening, and many of the behavior of Islamic movements. By the way, guys, when I say modern, that is not a compliment. I'm not saying it in a positive way. Many things are modern and good, many things are modern and bad. For example, communism and Nazism are also considered modern, right? Doesn't so. And when we talk about Islam, usually when we if we want to understand it, we go to the Quran and we go to the Hadith. But even though it's very relevant, and maybe in the future videos I'll show you how a lot of the actions of Islamic movements even today is rooted in the Quran and the Hadith. But to make sense of them in the context of modern politics, we need to understand an entire different story, which starts with some lines on a map. Let me know in the chat how many of you have heard of Sykes Picot. Sykes Picot, have you guys heard of that? Let me know in the chat. I want to see if anybody knows what that is, because I want to see. I really want this channel to be made for people who have a higher level of understanding of these ideas and discuss these things more deeply. I Okay, good. So many of you have. So I could go for volume or I could go for depth. And I decided that, nuance and depth is good to have on this channel. So these are some topics that we're going to be discussing that doesn't attract as many people as some of our other shows. But if you watch these and a whole bunch of other series of shows that I'm going to make, then the shows that we make when we analyze the news, you will be so much more well equipped than other people in understanding what the hell is going on. So right now, I want to have three different series. One of them will be the political Islam, and another series will be about Western politics and classical liberal values and the modern Republican tradition, or otherwise known as Enlightenment values. That would be another series. And another series when it comes that I want to do, which will be for members only, which will be focusing on ancient Islamic history, closer to the time of Muhammad. Okay, So these are the 3 series I want to do. And let me know, guys, if you appreciate that. I know there's going to be less people here. That's fine. But let me know if you appreciate that. Okay. So let's actually equip me army. Okay, let's do it. Okay, let's do it. All right. So let's start to be able to understand what the hell is happening. Let's actually start with this infograph. Isn't this beautiful? Because I you might wonder, what does this have to do with Islam and terrorism and Islamism and all that stuff? You might like, what the hell are you talking about? Why are we talking about maps? Why the hell are we talking about maps? I'll tell you. I'll let you know. Okay, and it will all make sense once we go through this. Oh, thank you so much, BT2 just became a member. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. That's very sweet. Okay. All right, guys. So look at this. Look at this. We have okay. So lines in the sand. How artificial borders forged the modern Middle East. Right. So on the left side we have natural nation building, and on the other side we have artificial state making. And I don't know if the word natural is the proper word to use here, because technically you could argue that all borders are artificial because they're man-made agreements. I get that. I get that. But let's just go with it, because that's how people are refer to it. So let's just go with this vocabulary right now. Okay. So if you look at countries like Iran and almost all countries in Europe, like Finland, for example, if you look at their borders, they're not straight lines, right? They don't look like straight lines on a map. They are okay because these are borders that are formed organically. These developed over centuries through wars, self-determination, and natural features like mountains or rivers. See, like if you look at a border of all the borders of Iran, it has that almost all the borders of Iran, it has that pattern. The reason why they don't look like somebody just put a ruler on the map and just drew a straight line is because these are gradual. They get shaped through gradual complex process, through a gradual and complex process. So this organic emergence of nation states ultimately led to more stable political entities, right? Why does this make it more stable? Because if you think about it, if you gradually, organically allow borders to take shape, take shape, it takes into account all the natural elements in that region, all the different competitions between different ethnic groups, religious groups, other identity groups, the different resources every community has, the wars, the self-determination, the different agendas the different groups of people have, historical sites, all of that, or organically, if you just allow it to happen through a historical process, will the border eventually will reflect everything that is naturally should be reflected in the border. If you just allow history to take its course, it will eventually present itself in where the border is at some point, right? It's kind of like the price of a stock or a stock of a company. If there is no, for example, government intervention, at the end of the day the price will reflect naturally what the price should be, if they're theoretically. And this is, for example, that's why countries like Finland and Iran, their irregular borders reflect a complex history of natural formation. So far, so good. So I'm saying 99% of the borders of Japan. Yes, that's as natural as it could get with Japan. Yes, natural borders, fantastic. Um, oh, that's BT June. Sorry. Yes, I should call you BT June. Sorry. Okay. Okay, so that makes sense. So compare that to artificial state making. And this is when, in the Middle East, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, we had colonial powers. They came over and they basically uh, gave created new countries, and they decided their borders for them from outside, uh, which which is why their borders look like really straight lines for miles and miles and miles. Okay, because straight lines on a map demonstrate that these are then not the natural order of things. This does not reflect different interests, different natural elements. These borders were imposed by foreign powers, drawn on maps by colonial powers, with no role for the region's people. By the way, I will give you a defense of these colonial Western powers, European powers, at some point during this presentation. But before I get there, I want you guys to guess what my defense is going to be. Because when it comes to the borders that, especially the UK, the British and the French drew in the Middle East, there's a lot of agreements that they effed up. They effed up big time. However, I have a defense. I'm going to play devil's advocate. Actually, I'm not going to play devil's advocate. I do actually believe this. I'm going to give a defense for the European powers. And this is a very unpopular point of view that I have. But let's think. I'm not going to give you now. Not going to give you the justification right now, but let's just move forward. Let's just keep first understand the difference between natural nation building and artificial state making, and then we will get there, right? Oh, Sean is saying, I have no idea what his defense is going to be. Ooh, suspense. Yes. BT saying this happened at the fall of the Ottoman, correct? Yes, this is the fall of the Ottoman Empire, right? Let me make sure. Okay, good. So these borders were imposed by foreign powers, as we mentioned. This is a recipe for instability. Okay, because there are different ethnic groups and religious groups were forced together, and you have to understand that natural borders automatically, organically reflect so many different things. They reflect so many different friendships, animosities, different interests, natural resources, natural barriers, ethnic tensions, religious tensions. All of that is taken into account organically without anybody designing it when a natural border lands where it lands, right? So imagine if you just artificially just draw a line on the map and decide that that's where the border is, because borders eventually where they land, it lands when they stop changing. It stops at the point where it's the most stable. A freshly made new border, because it hasn't taken all of that into account, is naturally going to cause a lot of conflict, right? Because it's fresh, it's new, and all of those tensions, all of those wars, all of that competition did not happen. So this is a recipe for instability. So, and especially the most simplest way to understand it is that you're putting different ethnic and religious groups were forced together, creating a lasting crisis. And here's where we talk about the Sykes Picot Agreement. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So this is so the main example of these unnatural, forced, imposed borders is the Sykes Picot Agreement, and this was a secret pact that created states like Iraq by combining rival groups, ensuring future conflict. So let's look at how all of that happened. Okay. So let's look at, for example, here. Oh, yeah. If you look at here, you can see the maps of Iran and Finland, and you can see that there's not that many straight lines. I mean, Iran has a few straight lines in the just a little bit with Iraq, over there in down in the in the west, in the Midwest, right? But most of it you can see is not very straight, and if you zoomed in an actual map, you can see that there's not that many straight lines, and Finland there's no straight lines at all, right? But they compare that to the images that we have on the right. These are the borders of, for example, Jordan and Iraq, you could see that you have really straight lines going for miles and miles and miles, right? This is unnatural. This is basically demonstrate that somebody just drew a line on a map. Okay, Tora is saying, I don't understand the importance of understanding this topic. I will get there. We are basically showing, I will show you why all of these lines demonstrate that all of the tension and the Islamic movements that came out of the Middle East were inevitable, and they're going to continue, and they're going to be bigger. And this is why this is the genesis of all the Islamic. I will connect the dots for you if you're just a little bit patient with me. I will connect the dots and I will show you why this Sykes-Picot agreement was the genesis story of almost every single Islamic movement that we have today started because of the Sykes-Picot agreement. So I'll show you this, right? So just trust me that we will get there, right? So let's go there. Let's continue. All right. So let's look at the states that crafted from, from the imposed by European powers, not by the people living there. So we have new countries that did not correspond to local identities, and they're also, their name even reveals that there are their artificial origins. For example, Iraq was started in 1921, and the name Iraq was just a medieval province of the Caliphate. It did not represent anything remotely like a country. The name Iraq, like for example, unlike the name Iran, but also it's interesting because Egypt is kind of like half-half. Like Egypt it is a name that represents something ancient and historic and native, to the land. However, the borders of Egypt, you cannot get more straight than Egypt, right? So, but like if a country like Iran is obviously something ancient, and the borders reflect a lot of history, right? But Iraq, the name is new. The name never referred to anything resembling a modern country today or a nation, and it was just the name of a province of the Caliphate. Jordan was started in 1921, which is a name after a river, right? They just like it never was something that remotely resembling a nation. Lebanon started in 1943, was named after a mountain. It never existed as an independent country or anything resembling that, anything resembling a nation. Saudi Arabia is the worst of them all. Okay, started in 1932, and we had nothing. I mean, the name Saudi is the name of a family, so it's basically never at all was there any country or a nation or a people with the identity of being Saudi until 1932, unless they were part of the Saudi family. And that whole area was just called the Hijaz, which was part of the Ottoman Empire. That area was never referred to as Saudi. It was just the Hijaz, and it was just crafted into a kingdom in a size and a name that had never previously existed. Okay. So should I defend? This all sounds pretty chaotic and messy. Actually, let me actually show this as well, and then I will defend the European powers. Okay. After I show how chaotic this is, right? So you can see in this next slide. By the way, guys, do you like the slide? The slides? These are really good slides, right? I made them with AI, right? So if you look at this map, if you look at you can see that what it's trying to present here is that the lines are separating a whole bunch of different ethnic groups, right? However, let me actually add something here, right? So if you look at, for example, Iraq and Syria, let's do as an example, we could look at the Kurds living in Iraq and the Kurds living in Syria. And you are now telling them you made a new country called Iraq, you made a new country called Syria, and you're telling them that they're now Iraqi, and you're telling them that they're now Syrian. How is that going to work? Because guys, when you're trying to build, when you're trying to have a nation state, the way to make it work, you cannot. It's unreasonable to expect that people will work with each other and celebrate this identity working with each other as a team towards a unified goal, when somebody else somewhere from out of this land drew the lines for them and made this country for them, right? And you could really see this here, right? So a lot of people misunderstand what's happening here. A lot of people are like, oh, these lines are separating different ethnic groups, and it would be better if these nation states were reflecting the ethnic groups, right? I don't agree with that. I don't agree with that because, first of all, that's basically an argument for ethno states. Second of all, we don't see that big of a problem with this with the Iranian courts, right? So the Iranian courts, for example, they consider themselves to be Iranian. Their Iranian identity is more important to them than their Kurdish identity, right? But for example, in Iraq, the Iraqi Kurds, their Kurdish identity is more important to them than their Iraqi identity. I mean, a lot of them don't even have much of an Iraqi identity. And same thing with the Syrian Kurds. But it makes sense, right? It makes sense, because why would an Iraqi Kurd consider himself Iraqi that much? You could see that they already have an ancient identity, and then you just came up. Some Europeans showed up just a few years ago. I mean, the country is not older than their grandparents, or most of them, their parents are older than the entire country. And all of a sudden, this identity that is deep rooted, that is historical, that there's a lot of culture, there's a language, there's a tradition, there's music around it, there's stories around it, there are clothings connected to it. All of a sudden, you are expected to care about your Iraqi identity, Iraqi as a nation, more than this ancient, more deep rooted identity. I mean, the human mind doesn't work like that, right? Especially given that this Iraq as a country, or Syria as a country, or Lebanon as a country has been created by somebody that doesn't even belong to this land. So of course your Kurdish identity is going to be more meaningful to you than this thing that was just invented. Does that make sense, guys? Does that make sense? But then compare that to Iranian Kurds. Why do the Iranian Kurds that don't have that problem? Because Iran as a nation has a deep, ancient, deep rooted, long lasting identity of its own, separate from ethnic identities, that is native to that land, that is natural to that place, that hasn't been brought from other places, that it has a lot of music, culture, history, traditions, festivals, so many things, clothing, food associated with that, poetry. And it's so deep and it's so rich that you have no problem bonding with non-Kurdish Iranians over that and considering yourself Iranian, because it just makes sense. It just makes sense. Like, this is why a Kurdish Iranian would be proud to say that I'm Iranian. I'm Iranian, and many Kurdish Iranians will say I'm Iranian first, Kurdish second. Does that make sense, guys? Everybody on the same side? Yes. So that's the difference, and that's really important to understand. Okay. So okay, so the victor. So let's go through the slide, and then I will now. After this, I will. By the way, guys, everything that is on the slide are stuff that is from the source that I'm using, which is a book by Hossein Alizadeh. But if I'm saying something that is not on the slide, these are my opinions that I'm adding to it, right? So if you see it on the slide, that means that it's coming from the source, the book that I'm using as a source. And if it's not, then it's my opinion. Okay, so that's the rule from now on. Just have that understanding in all our these lectures that we have with each other. Right. Okay, so let's go to the sides. Like the victorious European powers had little understanding of the region's deep-rooted identities. Groups like Sunnis, Shiites, Kurds, Christians, Alawites, and Druze were fragmented across new states. And so Arabs and other ethnic groups found themselves in several new states that have not become a nation even today sometimes, right? This often resulted in minority rule in states like Iraq, Lebanon, and Syria, leaving behind a legacy of crisis, right? So, for example, for Iraq, we had the Sunnis for a very long time ruling over Shias. In Syria, we had the Alawites for a very long time ruling over Sunnis and Kurds. So this was not stable. This was not stable in any way, and this is it was only natural for it to cause a lot of tension, right? Okay, let me actually now defend the European. Let's stop with the suspense. Like, let me tell you why I think the British and the French were not as bad as people make them out to be. Okay, so the understanding is that they effed up. They messed this whole place up. They came in, they had no idea about these different ethnic groups or different other identity groups, and they just drew the lines like they did a very sloppy job. And for decades now, we're dealing with so much tension because they were not so more careful when it came to creating these nation states. Okay, and it's always the Westerners' fault, right? And this fits very well with the idea that they ruin everything, right? It's the Westerners. It's not because of any problems in the Middle East that we have this much tension. This is the Western man coming in and ruining the Middle East, and now they are paying the consequences for it, and the world is blaming them even though it wasn't their fault. Okay, that's the narrative, right? I mean, that ignores a lot of the agency of the people living there and the tensions that already existed there between many of these identity groups, even before Westerners arrive. It ignores all of that. But another key important thing that it ignores, and this is something that I'm not giving this from any source. This is something that I came up with to as a way to demonstrate that this is very unfair to the European powers. And I'll let you know why this is very unfair, right? Because when this was happening, we were right in the middle of a transition. When the Ottoman Empire was falling, we were right in the middle of a transition between the age of empires and the age of nation states. Meaning that before the world was categorized into different nation states, the world that we lived in was you were either an empire or a colony of an empire, or barbarians. So we didn't have nation states. We had empires and then barbarians, right? So this concept of a nation state was something that was forming, and it was slowly it was already in Europe, and it was making its way to the rest of the world. And now it's everywhere. Now it's everywhere in the world, right? Now basically every land, almost every land on earth is part of a nation state right now. So the empire model is no more, and the nation state model is what we have, right? So think about it this way. When the Europeans came to the Middle East and they defeated the Ottoman Empire, what used to happen, what's happening is, I think the fallacy is called the fallacy of historicism. Is that what it's called? I don't remember if that was called. So we're judging it. We're judging it by our today's standards. When we blame the Europeans that went to the Middle East, and when they drew these borders, they didn't consult the people in there, and they just drew these borders for them, and just without taking their interests into consideration. We consider that bad because it violates something like the right to self-determination for everybody. And this is a value that is now universal that many people support today. However, if you, instead of comparing it to our standards today, if you compared what the Europeans were doing to what came before them, they were actually pretty progressive. This was very progressive because every empire before, every world power before them, before European powers, who defeated an empire, what they did was they would now rule as an empire forcefully on the people that they just conquered. That was the age of empires. So you had Empire A, Empire B comes and defeats Empire A, Empire A is no more, and Empire B takes over and rules over by force all the parts that used to be ruled over by Empire A without the permission or taking into account the interest of all of these colonies. Right? That's what you did. That's what every empire did. That's what the Mongolian Empire did. That's what the Arab Empire did. That's what the Japanese Empire did. That's what the Ottoman Empire did. Okay. But here, for the first time, you have world powers coming in and defeating the Ottoman Empire. And instead of continuing the imperial path, they were like, no, we are now in Europe. We have this thing called nation states. How about you guys have your own nation states? How about we don't want to be empires anymore? We're tired of being empires. How about we give you nation states? Would you like well, I didn't actually ask them. We'll just give you nation states. It's good for you. You trust me. You try. This new thing called nation states. You guys gonna love it. Okay. How about we give you guys, instead of ruling over you as empires, we'll just give you your own nation states. Okay. So it's true that they didn't take their interests into account while they were drawing the borders. And it's true also that they were taking their own interests into account when they were mostly their own interests when they were drawing the borders. That's true. But at least they were making them their own countries. At least they were like, okay, bye. We got rid of the Ottoman Empire. You guys do you now. I mean, we draw the borders in a way that works out for us, but you guys figure this out right now yourself. I mean, actually, they were involved, to be fair. They were involved for a very long time, but they created the pathway for them to be able to eventually decide their own politicians and take their own land under their own control instead of having to be ruled by an empire with capital so far away. This was so modern. This was so progressive for that time. So yeah, you could say like, well, the borders are crap, and you would be right about the fact that the borders are crap. But this is complaining about the fact that you weren't consulted when the borders were being drawn ignores the fact that every single world power was an empire before the Europeans. Every single other world power that did this, they didn't consult in anything else. They just came and they were like, okay, hello, we're now your new rulers, and your resources are ours now. That was how everybody behaved. So if instead of comparing the European actions to what we consider ideal today, if you compare them to everything else that came before them, then their actions look, not only did it doesn't look as bad as anymore, as bad anymore, it actually looks very moral. Like they were ahead of their time. They were respecting the people's right to self-determination, maybe not as much as today, but more than anyone else before them, more than any other world power before them. Does that make sense? Okay, BT June is saying great point, Herman. Okay, fantastic. Everybody else, is this understandable? I'm trying to go read these ideas and then come here and explain it in a way that is easy to understand. Like I'm trying to make nuanced topics more consumable. So let me know if it's working. Let me see if everybody is on the same page here. Okay, fantastic. Seems like it's working. All right. So let's look at the architects and their interests. So what were their interests? Because it's true that they were not empires anymore, so they weren't ruling as empires over these lands anymore. But it's a transition. You cannot expect them to just come in and all of a sudden we go from the age of empire to the age of every country being completely left alone, and without any without anything being imposed, or any forced meddling by world powers. Like that is like it doesn't work like that. That shift cannot happen that fast. So yes, finally, some these people managed to get their own nation states, including this is also the birth of Israel. This is how the birth of Israel started to start. Like these are the days like between World War One and World War Two. We see the process of nation building in the Middle East, right? Nation states building in the Middle East, right? So it's you would expect them. I mean, they're still world powers. They might not be acting as empires anymore, but there's a transition period where they're still forcing some of their will, some of what they want upon the people here. So we have to see, and the way that they drew the borders took their interests more into account than the interest of the people in this land. So what we have to look at, what were their interests, right? And their main interests. I mean, they had many interests, but let's look at the main ones, right? So the architects and their interests. And neither the British nor the French had any clear plans or foreign policies in the Ottoman territories before World War One. Nevertheless, they had many geopolitical interests in the region. So they didn't know. So this was a rush job, by the way, because they didn't plan for this ahead of time. So what was the main two countries that we have to take into, the main two world powers that we have to take into account is the British and the French. Okay, this was mostly decisions by the British and the French, right? So for the British, the main thing that they were interested in, by the way, guys, remember that this is at a time where oil and gas is not that big of a deal yet. Okay, it's something, but it's not that big of a deal. So when you're looking at the Middle East, they're not looking at it as like, oh, we need oil. Okay, it's mostly something else, right? We haven't gotten to the point where the oil and gas becomes so available and so important yet, right? So for the British, when they looked at the Middle East, their interest was mostly protecting access to India. That's what the British cared about. It wasn't about the Middle East itself. Was not that important other than a pathway to India. It was India was important, right? No, somebody's saying and the US. No, not the US. The US is nobody here right now. The US, we're talking World War One, so we're not talking World War Two right now. So not the US, just we're talking mostly the British and the French. Oh, thank you. We got a super chat. Look at this. Hold on. BT June is saying, thank you for making this series, Armin. I really appreciate the deep dive and your work. Tip and jar open. Let's go chat. 1 out of 10. Well, thank you. Thank you, BT, for always supporting what we do here. I really appreciate that. Okay, we got 1 out of 10 super chats. Thank you. Okay. All right. So the British, they cared about access to India. And what did that mean? That meant that they need to make sure that they could safeguard the Suez Canal and the Persian Gulf. That's what they cared about when they looked at the Middle East, right? For the French, and again, this is something I don't understand as much as the British because I haven't done a deep dive into this. But apparently, for the French, preserving long-term influence in Syria was critical, particularly within its Christian communities. And I don't really know the history behind that as much. Okay, so that's something that we could investigate in our future shows. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, now to the infamous Sykes Picot Agreement. Guys, this is the main. This is the genesis of all the main the grievances that um, Islamic movements have in the modern world. This is the I don't. It's like a it's like a hot rod in their ass, right? Like it's really mm, every single modern Islamic movement's story and what they're fighting for at some point makes a reference to this agreement. And understanding this agreement is crucial, it's essential for you to make sense of everything that is happening in the Islamic world today. By the way, the first time I heard Sykes Picot, the name Sykes Picot, was 11 years ago when ISIS became a thing. I remember watching a video from these new crazy ISIS people. And I remember at that time when ISIS was rising, everybody was obsessing with them because they was rising really, really fast. And they were like a big deal. I remember it was like everybody was fascinated with them and watching them and following their every move. And the videos coming out of Syria and Iraq, it was just going viral everywhere. Everybody was watching them. Do you guys remember them? Remember those days that no that everybody was like watching like every single video that came out of the Middle East, like they were like, oh my god, like people were sharing them, news junkies were watching every single one of them. And I remember watching one of those videos, and there was this ISIS people, they had a bulldozer, and they were basically, I think if I remember it correctly, they were destroying a border sign or a border fence or something like that. And I remember the guy looking at the camera and saying that, oh, we're destroying the Sykes Picot agreement, right? Like we're finally your the Western imperial Sykes Picot bullshit that you forced upon us. We're finally here to tear it apart. And they were doing that when they were destroying the border sign or the border fence or whatever it was, right? I don't know the Sykes what? The Sykes Picot what is that? Is that what the hell is Sykes Picot? Like I remember the guy was like talking about it as if like this was a curse upon Muslims and they were there to fix it, right? So, and apparently then I realized that, oh my god, they're actually obsessed with this. I didn't like once I started looking into what the whole is Sykes Picot, I realized like, oh my god, like every single Islamist movement is obsessed with this agreement. Right? So what is this? This was a secret wartime agreement between Britain and France, which became a prime example of artificial boundaries drawn by individuals, right? So some of the examples, like I mean, most of these lines that you see today is at the end, at some point became a product of the Sykes-Picot agreement. I mean, some of them change. Not everything is the way that it was under Sykes-Picot, but it's a product of that. Like the countries that you see right now in the Middle East, many of them are a product of that. Right? But some things that were different before, if for example, northern Palestine and Syria would go to the French, southern Palestine and Iraq to the British, central Palestine, including Jerusalem, would be internationally shared area. So this was like, so but obviously a lot of this changed eventually, right? The French gave up on some of the parts that they were supposed to have. And anyways, that's complicated. I'm not going to go into a lot of details, but one example of what this all of this causes, all of these artificial borders cause. But by the way, guys, we're going to go to why the Islamists consider this as such an insult. I mean, let me actually talk about it right now, right? So the idea by Islamists is that all of these borders, all of these nation states, all of these agreements is Western imperialism forced upon us, right? And the idea is that this is not a reflection of what belongs here. This is Islamic land. And Islam, the Islamic rule could only happen under a caliphate. And nation states are a modern Western invention, and it doesn't belong here. This is Islam's land, and Islam rules via caliphate, not with a nation, with dividing this area into nation states. And their understanding is that this is basically the Westerners' attempt to divide this area. And this is the conspiracy theory that, which is not true. Like, honestly, the nation state model was kind of more of a continuation of what they had for themselves. It was not a divide and conquer strategy. But the Islamist mindset is like, we had a caliphate under the Ottoman Empire. They destroyed it, and they divided these lands into unnatural, artificial, Western nation state under their own world order that doesn't belong here, as a way to divide us and keep us fighting among each other so that we don't unite and so that we cannot challenge the West. And the goal is to restore that. Right? The goal is to restore that. And here I just want to include a slide that shows how this whole thing is very unstable. I mean, we already talked about Iraq, so that we don't need to continue the instability of it. Like, you have the Kurds, you have the Sunnis, you have the Shias. You force them together into a culture called Iraq, and you tell them that they have to now have the Iraqi identity as a nation state. Well, you could see how this sets the stage for the instability and conflict that has defined Iraq's history up to the present day. It's pretty obvious that that would happen, right? But in addition to all of that, let's look at how obvious it was that Middle East would become such an unstable place, right? Even without the borders, what you have in the Middle East is that you have three Abrahamic religions. In fact, the Middle East is the birthplace of all of the Abrahamic religions. You have Christianity, you have Islam, you have Judaism. And then you have the Middle East connects three continents together. Africa, Europe, and Asia are connected via the Middle East. So you could obviously see how the Middle East is the pathway between three continents. And that's why it will obviously be of interest for every major world power throughout the history of civilization. Because wherever any world power that wants to control anything in a different continent has to go through the Middle East. So controlling the Middle East, if you are a world power, you have to control the Middle East because it's the access point to everything else, right? So it makes sense. And the interest that you would have as a world power to have control over the Middle East and compete with other world powers to have control over the Middle East, that's obviously going to cause tension. So you have the three Abrahamic religions and the interest in the Middle East because it's a pathway to everywhere else. So that's going to cause tension. And beyond just Abrahamic religious identities, you have ancient identities. Okay? So you have pre-Abrahamic ancient identities, like Kurdish, like Persian, like Yazidi, like so many different ancient identities that are native to this land. And those identities those pre-Abrahamic identities are competing against each other and also against the newer Abrahamic identities. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Oh, guys, we got our second super chat. Sam saying, how do we define the Middle East? We have different definitions, but mostly I would say that anything that is not North Africa, so basically to the east of North Africa and to the west of Pakistan and Afghanistan and to below Turkey, and all the way down to Saudi Arabia would be the Middle East, right? So North Africa would not be included. Pakistan and Afghanistan would not be included. And yeah, so Turkey, most of Turkey will not be included. So it would be Iran. Most will Turkey be included? I mean, I've seen different definitions. So I've seen some people include Afghanistan and Pakistan, but I think you shouldn't include them, right? But I have seen no, Egypt is not Middle East. Egypt is Africa. Egypt is North Africa. I mean, some people include North Africa, but some people don't include it. So, but obviously, like it would be Iran, Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, uh, Arab countries next to the Persian Gulf, Israel, and yeah, stuff like that. So, no, Morocco is Africa, not Morocco. Okay, so, but let's get back to the topic. So, yeah, so you have the Abrahamic identities, you have ancient pre-Abrahamic identities, you have the pathway between different you have the connection between three continents, and then you could add fuel to all of this tension, literally actually add fuel to it by the discovery of oil and gas. I mean, even without oil and gas, I mean, what are the odds? The place that already had all of these points of creating tension, all of a sudden you realize that, oh, they also have almost all the oil and gas. And then you realize that world powers now are even more interested in this area because most of their energy, most of everything that moves the entire world is coming out of this place as well. So there's like a renewed interest in the Middle East. We're like, even if the world powers were supposed like we're gonna go like, okay, maybe we're gonna leave. Now all of a sudden oil and gas means like, okay, we're back. We're back. Okay. So obviously that's going to cause a lot of tensions as well. So, and then add to all of that poorly drawn borders that keeps the tensions alive. And you can see why this is an area of conflict. So you see how many different elements all of a sudden add on top of each other. Like it's only makes sense why you see so much war and conflict in this region. You have three Abrahamic religions competing with each other. You have ancient identities competing against each other. You have it being a pathway of connecting three continents, which makes the world powers always interested and want to meddle in this area throughout history. And then now you have oil and gas, and you also have poorly drawn borders. So it's a cradle of civilization and a center of conflict. So the Middle East is the cradle of civilization and the birthplace of the three world religions. Yet today it is described as a volcanic center where conflicts of interest threaten to mutate into a clash of civilizations. It's a region plagued by war, failed regimes, and political turmoil, but also one of profound historic and strategic importance. And in that context, all of a sudden you see the rise of the modern political Islamic movements. Okay. So it's good to understand all of this. It's good to understand all of this context and history when we now talk about politics in Islam. Okay. So everything so far so good, understandable. You're with me? Let me know if this is helpful, by the way that we're discussing this. Let me know if this is a new way to look at all of this for you guys. Are you guys? Everything good? All right. So we now are ready to finally talk about Islam. Right? So the rise of political Islam. And guys, before we talk about political Islam, let's make this pretty clear, right? We are forced to talk about it this way: political Islam and Islamism, right? Because if you're a long-term viewer of this channel, that I don't agree with the idea of Islam and political Islam. And this is something that we're going to get into deeper in future shows where we dive deeper into Islamic scripture to see the political nature of Islam. But that I consider Islam to be inherently political. Politics is part of the DNA of Islam, it's inseparable. So, suggesting that there's Islam and then political Islam doesn't make any sense to me. Islam, by its nature, is political. However, given how common it is to talk about Islamism basically is referring to political Islam. So then the way that the world is speaking about this, in the West especially, it's interesting because Islamism is not something that Islamists say. Okay, there is no concept of Islamism among Islamists. For them, it's just Islam. And I agree, it's just Islam. There is no Islam and Islamism. It's just Islam. It's all of it is Islam. But because if we keep insisting on just calling Islamism Islam, we wouldn't be able to understand all of this literature and all of the way other people talk about this. We have to understand how other people talk about this. And the way they talk about this, we have Islam and then we have Islamism, which is political. It's important for us to, I mean, if we keep just saying like, oh, that's not right, you shouldn't say Islamism, you shouldn't say political Islam, well, then we're not going to be able to understand what other people are saying because we're refusing to understand their language. Right? So every time I say Islamism, I know sometimes I'm going to be picky, like, I mean, what the hell are you talking about? It's all Islam. I understand that. But if we want to study this, we have to also understand that this is how these terms are used. Okay? So this whole idea of Islamism, or the way I like to think, the way I like to separate it is instead of Islam and political Islam, which, and instead of saying Islam and Islamism and Islam referring to political Islam, I like to say Islam in a Islamic movements. Well, we didn't have movements. We had Islamic empires, and now, which is pre-modern, and now we have Islamic movements, which is modern because they don't have an empire anymore, right? So we had Islamic empires, which is pre-modern, like pre the fall of the Ottoman Empire. And then the modern sense is we have Islamic movements, which is a more modern thing, right? So that's how I separate it in my mind instead of political and non-political. So Islamism, in their words, or in my terminology, modern political Islamic movements, they view the way to view it is you could view it in two ways, right? So in the view of many Islamist movements, or political Islam is both a reaction and a project. It's a reaction and a project, and this is what if will connect these Islamic movements to everything that we discussed earlier, right? It's a reaction against colonialism, secularism, individualism, and modernism, which is quite a contradiction. We should get to that, right? And it's a project to restore an alternative order. If you understand these two, you will understand what's happening more than 99% of the people out there. So let's go over both of these one by one in detail, because this is very interesting. I consider all of this very interesting. Okay. So let's look at the project part first. It's a project to restore an alternative order, right? This is why in my shows, when we're covering the news, I keep insisting that you cannot look at Islam as just a religion in the way that you look at Christianity or Judaism or Zoroastrianism or Hinduism or Baha'ism or Buddhism as a religion. Okay. Islam is a religion. Okay. However, it's much, much, much more than just a religion. Islam is a world order. Islam is very clearly, if you understand the scripture, if you understand the Quran and Hadith, you realize that Islam is not just a religion, it's a world order. It's a political world order. And because it's a political world order, it's not competing with other religions. It's competing with other world orders. If you understand this, you will get so many of the other points that we make during our shows when we're covering the news. So Islam is at odds with world orders, because think about it. If you are a world order, then you're playing a zero-sum game, meaning that the only way for you to enforce your order or place your order is by removing other world orders. And the current world order that we have is the Western model that came out of the French and especially the American Revolution, which is the nation state model with, I don't know, parliaments, with presidents or prime ministers and voting and separations of power. It's the nation state model. I mean, to different nation states abide by these principles to different degrees, but at the end of the day, they still have the core, sovereignty of a nation state recognized by other nation states, with borders that they agree upon, with a sovereignty that is meant to reflect the self-determination of the people who are local to that land, rather than it being forced upon them by a central empire from somewhere else. This is a Western idea, and it's modern, and it's the framework that we now have for everywhere, almost everywhere that we have land right now, almost. And this is a model that has destroyed every other imperial model, including the Islamic imperial model. And this is important to understand, that the caliphate model by Sunni Muslims and the Imamite model by Shia Muslims, okay, the Imamite model, by the way, is newer, it's Khomeinism, right? It's an imperial model. It's a pre-nation state imperial model. And the project by Islamic movements is to restore an alternative world order to the one that we have today. And the reason why it's important to understand that is because the current model that we have today is the reason why we have so much progress, so much stability, so much economic development, more clean water, more access to energy, more access to food, more access to healthcare, the least amount of violence ever experienced in the past 150 years has been remarkable compared to everything that came before it for the past 10,000 years of human civilization. Thanks to this new model, everything is growing at a rapid pace and it's working out. Violence has decreased, poverty has decreased, everything is getting better, everything is more stable. Trade has increased thanks to the stability that this model has provided to human civilization. So this is why this is such a big threat, because if Islamic movements are introducing a world model, and to do that, they have to take down the current one, then they're basically everyone's enemy, because everyone's life depends on the current world model that we have. Right? So that's one part to understand. And now let's go to the reaction. So it's also a reaction against colonialism, secularism, individualism, and modernism. So two things I want to focus on here: colonialism and modernism, because those two are both kind of a contradiction, right? And Peter Demont points out the contradiction in the modern one, right? So he, in his word, Islamic, and he shouldn't, like, I don't like the word fundamentalism here, so I'm going to change it a little bit. So instead of saying Islamic fundamentalism, I'm going to say modern political Islamic movements are an anti-modern product of modernity. Anti-modern part, they themselves are a product of modernity, and they're anti-modern. And by the way, guys, again, remember, modernity doesn't mean good. Again, I want to remind you that there are many things that are modern and good. For example, the Enlightenment values are modern and good. The modern scientific method is pretty good. Many things in modernity are good, but remember, communism is modern, Nazism is modern, so not everything modern is good, right? So, and modern political Islamic movements are also a product of modernity, and they're anti-modern. And here's the proof that they are actually modern. Let's go look at the term colonialism, because these movements are also a reaction to colonialism, and that's also a contradiction, and shows that they're a product of modernity. This is actually quite interesting. And by the way, this is all the stuff that I'm adding to this myself. Like, this is not from the book that I've read. This is the stuff that I'm adding myself. Okay. And I find this fascinating because the fact that modern political Islamic movements are anti-colonial should not make much sense if you actually understand Islam, and if you also understand the project that they're in. Because how could you be anti-colonial when what you're trying to bring as an alternative order is an empire, right? The caliphate model that Islamists are trying to bring is an empire. So how could you be anti-colonial when your favorite model is an empire? So how does this show that this is modern? Because if you read the Quran and Hadith, there is no anti-colonial language in the Quran and Hadith. There is no anti-colonial language in the Quran and the Hadith. So where is this anti-colonial literature coming from? These narratives are coming from? Anybody can come up with a guess? I mean, if you read the Quran and Hadith, if anything, you will see like, oh yeah, this is colonial. Okay, this is worse. This is imperial, right? I mean, at least colonial settlers will go in and build stuff out of nothing. This is imperial. So how did this get into their language? How did anti-colonial messaging get into the language of these Islamic movements? Given that if you want to be properly anti-colonial, you should be anti-Islam, because it is an imperial project. If you want to be anti-imperialist, for example, right? Yes. Okay. So some of you are guessing. This is basically the alliance of red and green, the red-green alliance, and this is how this happened, right? After the humiliation of the Sykes-Picot Agreement and the fall and the humiliation of the fall of the last Islamic Caliphate, which was the Ottoman Empire, right? These Islamic movements, they are anti-Western powers for two reasons, right? One of the reasons, which we discussed just right now, is the only way to have your own world order is to fight with the one currently existing. And even the world order today, because it's Western and it's being maintained by Western powers, so to be against the world order that is ruling the world today, you have to be against the powers that are maintaining it, which would be anti-Western. But another reason why they're anti-Western is because of the degree of humiliation that they felt from European and Western powers as a whole. This is a huge crisis of identity. So then the first motivation is to restore the Islamic rule, the Islamic Caliphate. But the second and sometimes stronger motivation is revenge. Revenge for a deep, 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 painful wound, which is the humiliation and the inferiority complex that they have been living with ever since. This is a huge crisis of identity, which is so big that it's actually a mental disorder. That's how big of a crisis of identity, of humiliation it is. And a lot of these movements are driven by a really, really strong desire for revenge against the West for what happened to them. Right? So in that context, you could see that there's another movement that has similar views against Western powers. And we're talking about commies and basically leftists, right? They are also, for their own reasons, which we're not going to get into, extremely anti-Western powers. And given that commies were everywhere, including the Middle East, and these Muslim movements were living side by side with them, given that they shared a lot of hate for Western powers, basically they were copied each other's homeworks. So this language of anti-colonialism, and here's the thing: a lot of leftists, commies and non-commies alike, they have this deep, they have their identity. The way that you create an identity is by defining people who are your in group and your out group, right? And a lot of leftist movements, their origin, the literature that everything else goes back to at some point is the French Revolution, right? And also the correct movements toward away from imperialism towards every people from every place basically determining their own destiny locally. Okay, so that was just like right now when we have the woke movement jumping on, basically hijacking or stealing the success of classical liberal values and deforming it and turning it into something else and trying to ride the wave and make themselves relevant because it was so successful. Back then, this whole anti-colonialism or anti-imperialism, which was the move in the right direction as we stepped from the age of empires to the age of nation states, because it was so successful, because it defined the understanding of modern politics. So you had a whole bunch of leftists and other, leftist movements that defined their identity based on them being pro the right to self-determination and independence against imperialism or colonialism. And this identity was so deep rooted in these ideas and this type of language that even when the European powers stopped being imperial and colonial, willingly, may I add, they continued to act like the West was imperial or colonial, okay? Because they were too married to that concept. They were too married to the idea that this is our enemies, and if that enemy doesn't exist anymore, then your identity doesn't exist anymore. And it's, as you know, it's really hard to get rid of identities, and identities are often defined by who you're against. So you need to keep the idea of imperial forces or colonial forces alive, because if they die, we die, right? I mean, if your identity dies, then you die. So you have to come up with terms like neo-imperialism or neo-colonialism to act like they're still doing that, even they're not. But because anything Western was defined as colonialism or imperialism, even though they weren't anymore in that space, and then you have Islamic movements that are anti-Western, you could see how the leftist ideas would move into the way that these Islamists are talking about the West. And they don't recognize the irony, because they at the same time are acting that they're anti-colonial while they're wanting to bring a caliphate. I don't know why the irony is not obvious to more people. But the very fact that the stuff, the language that they're using, cannot be sourced to the in the Quran and the Hadith, and it's more resembling modern leftist movements, shows that these Islamic movements are somewhat modern. But guys, isn't that fascinating? Has anybody explained that in that way, like in this way to you guys before? Isn't this fascinating? I'm fascinated by this. Isn't that interesting? Let me know if you're finding this as interesting as I am in the chat. All right. Wait, hold on. Click twice. All right. So what we're trying to do here, so what these Islamic movements are trying to do is to bring an alternative vision, a borderless ummah. Right. So again, the concept of an ummah is something that we're going to be getting into a lot deeper in the future, and explain it into a lot more like we're going to look at many different theories that tries to explain what the ummah is. And I promise you that once you understand that, many things will make sense to you. So, but that's a topic for another day. So what is it? So, but let's touch on it just a little bit right now, okay? So the common goal for generation of Islamist movements is the formation. I mean, I'm going to change what it says here. It's not the formation; it's the unification of the ummah. And the ummah right now, let's just define it very, in a basic way. If we will go in a deeper right now, but the ummah is basically the global community of Muslims. And if you want to add something to it, it's the political global community of Muslims. I think that would be more accurate. And the reason why I would change what this says on the slide from formation to the unification, because the ummah does exist, but the ummah is just headless without a caliph. It's like a headless body. The ummah exists. It's basically the combination of the entirety of the Muslim community would be the ummah, but it is, but it's headless and without a direction and without unity, without a caliph. So the goal is not the formation of the ummah. The goal is the uniting the ummah for the cause of bringing back Islamic rule. And the ummah is conceived as is seen as an alternative political order to the nation state system, which was imposed by colonial powers, as we said earlier. It is a vision rooted in Islamic scripture, and we will actually go in the future look at Islamic scripture and where the idea of ummah comes from. So it is a vision rooted in Islamic scripture, seeking to transcend the artificial lines drawn on the map. And this is where it gets to the warning that we have. Okay, so this is how Arnold Toynbee, if I'm pronouncing it right, this is how he describes it. But then I will give you an analogy, a metaphor that actually I think will make it quite easy to understand what's happening. So he says, pan-Islamism is a dormant yet phenomenon. We have to reckon with, and we have to reckon with the possibility that the sleeper may awake. All right. So the way I like to describe this is that, you know how we keep on talking about the lines on the map, the artificial lines on the map. Think about the artificial lines on the map that we discussed as a cage. Okay, as metal bores on a cage, and the pan-Islamism is a dragon, is a sleeping dragon within that cage. So pan-Islamism is the dragon, and the borders that we drew on the map in the Middle East are the bars of that cage. And the understanding is that this dragon will wake up at some point. Okay. And once it wakes up, these bars on the cage are not going to be able to hold it back. And everything that we're seeing today is the consequences of the dragon slowly waking up, and it hasn't woken up yet, and basically meaning that this is just the beginning, right? And this dragon will come for the West. This dragon will come for the West, and the cage is not strong enough to hold it back, and it's going to come with a vengeance, with a sense of, with a desire of revenge against everything and every force that was responsible for putting it in that cage. Okay, so let's go. All right, so this is an enduring discourse. The legacy of the Middle East artificial borders is not merely historical. It fuels an ever continuing discourse that challenges the foundation of the modern state system. The concept of the Ummah is not a single agreed upon idea, which we will talk about later, but its call remains a powerful force. So this is not just something historical. This is something that connected to everything that you're seeing happening in the, not just in the Middle East, but also in North Africa and any other Islamic country, this, and also Turkey. And it will just continue to make its way into Europe and Canada. And at some point, by the way, this is something that we're going to talk about later, but I think that organically this movement is moving into a new phase. I think through Al Qaeda and ISIS. So we had the Muslim Brotherhood attempt. Then we had the Vilayat al-Faqih attempt. Both of those are now dying. We had the Al Qaeda model attempt. We had the Hizb ut-Tahrir model attempt. We had the ISIS model attempt. And I think the reason why they all failed is because the new modern system that we have, the world order that we have, really rewards the societies that follow the classical liberal model method with a lot of wealth, to the point that that wealth can buy them big armies. So the model works too well for the Islamists to be able to defeat the new world order in the battlefield. So the way that empires used to fight against each other was in battlefields, but the new world order that we have is too successful in a way that you cannot defeat it militarily in any way. Like the Islamic movements have been continuously humiliated, not just by the world power, which is United States, but even by the tiny country of Israel right in their backyard. Like they can't even handle a tiny little country, all of them uniting against each other, trying to remove Israel from the Middle East. They fail at that. So if they cannot get rid of Israel, imagine them trying to get rid of the United States. So their humiliation just keeps compounding and makes them more angry, but it also is giving them the realization that this is not something that we could win in the battlefield. And that's why I think we're moving into a second phase of trying to fight the West. And that's with two modern methods, two new methods. And they work with each other. And they are, number one is migration. And number two is using the democratic systems already put in place. The very thing that made these countries stronger has a weak point. Meaning that if we move to these countries in high enough numbers, and by the way, all of this is happening organically. It doesn't need to even be planned. right? I mean, it's like it's a system is it's like a self-aware system. It doesn't the individuals in the system do not need to be aware for the system itself to act as if it's self-aware and it's adjusting, right? And what this Islamic model, the way it's working right now for it to be able to confront the West, is through mass migration, through West into Western countries, and then using these countries' own democratic processes to take a slice of the political system. So if you look at the traditional model, if this is your territory and the enemy comes and bites out and takes out a geographical territory, that's the old model. And because the borders are being defended too well and their militaries are stronger, we instead of doing that, what we do is we don't take a geographical bite, we come and take a political bite by being a larger and larger share of the voter base of the population of these countries. So that's the new model that we're dealing with. Let me know if all of that made sense, and let me know if you welcome these lectures, because I want to do a lot more of them. Let me know if this was helpful. And yeah, we also got another super chat. Shauna saying, yes, but Japan had this too, yet recovered. What were you referring to? I don't know at what point of I should have just responded to this earlier. Sorry. What is this referring to? Yeah. Thank you, Shauna. And here, Shauna say. Shauna saying the West's weakness is its belief in the universal man. Yes, we're all human, but we aren't the same. Okay, yep. Actually, this is a topic that we're going to dive into in a lot of detail at some point, because I'm going to do a series on politics in Islam, modern, politics and modern Islamic movements. This is the first one, and guys, there's so much more there. This is just like a 0.1% of this entire thing. Okay, this is just the beginning. If you want me to continue with, there's going to be like a mountain of knowledge and interesting facts here that we could work with. We could go through with each other. So just let me know. I want to know if you guys are want more of this, because I want to see if I should continue, because I think I myself, I'm very biased to continue doing this because I'm really fascinated by this. But other than these series, I want to do another series on Western values, on the modern Republican tradition, on basically classical liberal values, or so this, it has so many names. I don't know which one you guys prefer. So you could call it Western values, you could call it classical liberal values, you could call it the modern Republican tradition, you could call it Enlightenment values. I don't know what you guys want to call it, but it has so many different names, right? So I want to do a series on that, because the series that we're doing here, we're understanding what is threatening our model, what is threatening our way of life, but we should also know what the hell we're defending and why. Like, we cannot just explain what we're defending against if we don't really understand what is the thing that we're defending. We're not going to value it enough to defend it, right? So I want to do another series that we explain what is the thing that we're trying to defend and why it's worth defending. So which I want to do it parallel to this one. Oh, I mean the humiliation. Oh, okay. I get it. Okay, so you meant Japan went through this humiliation, but they recovered. Oh, I see. Interesting. I wonder what the difference is. I bet you it's Islam. I think it's Islam. Definitely, you guys went. Okay, fantastic. That's actually a very interesting point, Shana. That's a good comparison that we could make. All right, guys. So wait, hold on. We are going to be having a discussion as a group together in about 30 minutes in our famous discussion group. By the way, guys, our discussion group is growing. So if you guys don't know, every day we have a group discussion in our discussion group. I put the link in the chat. The link is also in the description. We discuss the news, political ideas, everything that is happening, and everybody can open their mic and speak. The link to our discussion group is in the chat. Let me just put it in the chat one more time. It's also in the description. So yeah, we're starting our chit chat in half an hour from now. So if you enjoyed that, just come over there. It's free to join. So check it out. And I'll see you guys there. All right. And let me know, comment on this live stream that we did. And let me know what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, because I really want your feedback to continue doing this. Oh, thank you, Carl. Carl just gave us a super sticker. Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, guys, come. Yeah, Tora is inviting you guys to come over, hop over there. It's growing. Our community is growing now. It's growing faster than before. So yeah, it's fun there. All right, guys. So let's go, and yeah, I'll talk to you guys same time tomorrow. All right. Okay. Amazra Chai, Javid Shah. Mwah. See you guys. Oh, thank you.